Today on the podcast, we talk with Dragon's Back multi-day stage race winner, Max King. And he shares with us tips on nutrition, recovery, mental attitude for difficult races, and much more. Even if you're not doing a multi-day stage race in the near future, there are tons of great training and racing tips that Max provides in this episode. So don't miss it. All right, welcome back to the Tracer Podcast. Today we have a familiar guest, somebody who's been on before, the one and only Max King. We're going to be talking about stage racing today. Max, one of the best things about Max is his ability to excel in so many different kinds of events, from fast racing to what we're going to be talking about today, which is multi-day stage racing. And Max is coming off of a win at Wales's Dragon's Back race, which is a race I think a lot of people listening to this might not be familiar. So Max, congratulations on a first place win at Dragon's Back. Tell us about the race, man. Tell us how it went, what the race even is. Give us the whole download here.
Yeah, thanks. It was awesome. It was a cool experience. I think people are kind of familiar with stage racing, but the thing about Dragon's Back is it's just really long. And so the Dragon's Back is a race that goes from the very north tip of Wales in Conway all the way to the south in Cardiff over 6 days of racing. Each day is about 70K. So it varies. The first day is it turned out to be about 31 to 32 miles. And then every other day is basically at 40 miles. And so it's a race that is like really long. When you're talking about a stage race, doing stages of 40 miles every day for 6 days in a row, that's a lot of miles. And so, going into this, it was like, this is a big stage race. This is 6 days, which I've done before, but I've done Trans Rockies, which is a stage race in Colorado. And it's a race that, is on average 20 miles a day. So running anywhere from, I think, 15 miles up to about 25 miles for that race each day, which is for an athlete is pretty manageable as far as like what I'm running on a normal basis. You get up to about 120 miles for the week for Trans Rockies, whereas this one is 240 miles for the week. So there's a ton of miles on the legs. It's a long stage race. And it's, Wales, if anybody's out there is familiar with like the type of terrain that Wales has and the UK has, it's rough. I mean, it doesn't have a ton of elevation gain, although this one, like, I don't know what they did here is they added in some hills. And each day, like, I think we averaged about 10,000 feet of gain a day for this race. First day out of the blocks, we had 13,000 feet of gain. The next day was 11,000. The day after that was 10. Then we dropped below 10, but went right back up to 11,000 feet of gain the next day. So it was pretty brutal in terms of just the mileage, the elevation gain. And then the last thing that is a challenge with this race in particular is the footing. You do end up running like a significant amount of road. There's about 50 miles of road throughout the entire race, about 20%. But then you've got another like 20 to 30% that is basically for us off trail. They call it tracks over there. But it's this little narrow track about this wide, like literally 6 inches wide through the tussock grass, which might be boggy. It's all wet. And you can't see where your foot's going. And so, I'm running along, trying to put one foot in front of the other like this. And then I hit a tussock and just poof, boom, I'm down on the ground and it's all soft, but you're like rolling on the ground. And so the footing there is a huge challenge. It's really uneven. It's slick, it's wet, it's muddy. There's rock. It's kind of got a little bit of everything, which is kind of something it's unique about this particular race, because you still have the 50 miles of road. You still have a good amount of like gravel road. And then you've got this off trail stuff through bogs and marshes and tussock grass and everything else. You kind of have to be really well rounded as far as your ability levels to be able to run on this stuff. Day one also included a huge ridge line traverse all the way around that like Snowden area, Gripcock, and it's some of the most technical running that I've done in a race ever. I've done another one of the Ore events races, one of Shane's races up in Skyline, Scotland, which was the Glencoe Skyline, which to date is the most technical race I've ever done. It was full on like rock climbing in the middle of a race and then a ridge scramble that if you slip and fall, I'm sorry, but you're done. Like you're going to die. It's just the exposure level there. And this race had a little bit of that in it, which was to me like fantastic. I love that sort of stuff where you're scrambling along these like really knife edge ridges and there's some consequence to it. So you really have to slow down and focus. The problem was is it started raining that morning. And so the stuff we were on was like, it was pretty slick. And I was like, man, if you're not used to this stuff, I don't know, like if you have like, fear of exposure and stuff, I don't know how you do this. And so that's one of those unique things about this race. You go from everything in between, from just runnable road that tends to hurt at the end of like a 200-mile week to like really technical ridge traverses and stuff. So you have to be able to do everything in your, in that running discipline of like technical to like just some fast road running if you want to compete. So it's a phenomenal race. I mean, I could go on and keep talking about it, but I'm sure you have other questions. So
no, that gives us a good idea of what this was. I was following it a little bit online. The time zone difference was making that a little challenging because you were finishing up usually by the time I was checking it, but you led the race from start to finish, from what I understand. Checked in on you on the first day. It looked like you had 12 minutes on second place, and then it kind of just added up over the course of 6 days until eventually you won by
like an hour.
How much? Maybe an hour
20,
or two?
something like that. Hour 20. I was gaining a little bit each day. It's like with this long of a race, like I had like 10 minutes, I think, on the first day, 8 minutes on the second day. That like 20 minutes, it could go either way, like pretty easily if somebody has a bad day or somebody has a good day with that long of a race. On the third day, I managed to like open up that gap and get about 30 minutes because it was a little bit more runnable that day. We had a huge uphill runnable climb that day. And so I did get a good gap so at the end of day 3, I had close to 50 minutes. And by then I was like, okay, like I feel like I have a little bit of a cushion. This feels pretty good. I just need to not screw it up. And so we kind of like the next couple of days kind of chilled a little bit, ran together with Simon and Gabe, the other two guys that were right behind me. And, just made it a little bit more relaxing feel for the rest of the race. So that was kind of nice.
Interesting. What would you say? So you mentioned the uphill running. That was kind of your forte. That is one of your strengths, is fast uphill running. You're pretty good technically as well. So I imagine when the knife edge was at its worst, you were probably gaining time on people. What was the hardest section for you? Where did you feel like you struggled the most?
Yeah, and honestly, like so Simon, let me give you a little backstory on the participants here. So Simon was a previous winner in 2021. Simon Roberts, super good runner, local guy, so lives right outside of Cardiff. Mm-hmm. Like the part of this course is kind of in his backyard where he's training all the time. So I knew he had like this particular advantage because. So the other thing about this race is that we're navigating the entire thing off of a map, compass, or our GPS on our watch, right? And so the easiest thing for us to do is to load the track on our watch and then just follow that blue line as we go. That's obviously like not the easiest thing to like make sure that the GPS on the watch matches up on the map and it's always right on. It's not. And so I knew like there were also little shortcuts that the locals would know where they could take a couple of minutes off of like, I had to go up here and follow a road on the map according to my GPS, but there was a track that went right through a field or something like that, So there are a couple of
Right.
those where like Simon had a particular advantage, and it's really funny because day one and day two, I'd get away from him on a long climb up, and this happened right away on day one, going up the first big climb of the day, and we go into the clouds, and it gets all foggy up there, um, you know, like regular Welsh weather. Get into the fog, and I get up there, and I'm like looking at my GPS. I'm like, it looks, God, I don't know what's going on here. It's kind of like doing this little squiggle around, and I think I just want to go to the top, but I can't see it. So I actually end up going up and then drop over the other side of this little track, take about 5 feet, and then start heading back up this other little gully. And all this whole time is all scramble stuff. It's not like a trail or anything else, but I'm like full on hands climbing up this little gully and pop up and, oh, hey, Simon. Simon's standing above me. He's like, what are you doing down there? And it's like one of those things where he knew where he was going, and I was trying to
Yeah.
follow his GPX track because I had no idea. I'd never been up there before. And so I just kind of popped down the other side, go around and go back up. And then he's standing there and he gets like, 5 minutes on me or whatever. And so we run together
Yeah.
again for a little while. I get back away from him. Same thing happens again, like 2 or 3 more times until finally the afternoon that day kind of broke open. The sky broke, and you could actually see where you're going. So this ridgeline traverse, this technical traverse, I kind of like started like getting away from him on there, and I could see where I was going. So that was how I opened up the lead on day one. But I knew that was going to keep happening every single day, so I had to be really careful about that, and then just make sure that I was running faster and getting away from him toward the end of the day. And that was kind of my strategy and how I kind of kept getting those little time gaps on him every day. Is I'd get away at the last quarter of the race basically because I'd push that a little bit, and he was kind of slipping a little bit in the end of the day. And then there's Gabe Joyce, who is from Wyoming. He's an American guy going in the same as me. He had a little bit of a rough start to the first 2 days. And so the end of the week, we ended up running a lot together, and he started pushing me on some of those runnable climbs. But the gap between us was such that I basically had to stay with him and not let him get away from me. So he wasn't gaining time on me each day. So those were the two guys that I was kind of facing off with in this race. And so by the time day 3 rolled around, I had that 50 minutes on Simon, knew that I had enough of a cushion, and kind of it got a little bit more comfortable for me, basically, even though, obviously we're still running like 40 miles a day and it's pretty rough. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Where would you say, it's a 6 day race? Where would you say you were in the most pain from just
uh,
a fitness slash body, muscles, energy, whatever it was?
it was,
Did you
yeah.
ever get sick? Like those kinds of things. Like where was it just like question where you were kind of it seems like in something like this, it would be really hard to get through the whole thing without questioning
My life
yourself at
choices.
some
Yeah.
point.
I
Yeah,
was
yeah. Where
questioning,
did you hit
I
that?
was questioning my life choices on day 4. Actually, it was weird.
Okay.
Like through 3 days, felt really good. Day 4, I don't know what it was, but I started out, I felt like trash the entire day on day 4. We had a long kind of runnable road downhill on day 4, and I was running with Gabe, and I just felt terrible. Everything hurt, like ligaments, joints, all, yeah, like everything. It just kind of it felt like the days were kind of catching up to me. And so I was
Mm,
getting kind of nervous for days like 5 and 6. Then I was like, oh man, I don't know what's going on. Like, am I like starting to take a nosedive? But like what I realized was I didn't recover the end of day 3. Like every night I'd been doing something for recovery. And the night of day 3, I kind of think I made a conscious decision of like, let's see what is going on. And I want to try day 4 without doing anything at the end of day 3 as far as
mm,
recovery goes. And let's see what happens. And sure enough, like day 4 felt like crap. So the end of day
interesting.
4, I focused like real hard on recovery that night. And day 5, back up to like my like day 3 level. Like I felt good again. I could run. I had power. Was running really well on hills, and felt like 10 times better. So that,
So open that up a little bit for us, because I'm sure people are listening to this right now and they want to know, what does that mean, right? Like you
yeah.
focused on one day, you didn't do these things, you kind of like played with it a little bit, and you realized how critical they were. So what were those things?
Well, Joey, see, this is my secret to success. And I don't know if I want to give away all my secrets.
Yeah. Okay. So
Okay.
tell us what you feel good about,
No,
or what you're willing to
uh,
let the world know.
I will give you all the information that you ever wanted to know. So
Yeah.
the first thing I did was like basically get some food in me and some calories. Like you're out there for like 8 hours. Like I'm fueling
Hmm.
obviously during it, but I want to get in some calories. The one thing that I'd felt like we were lacking throughout the week was some protein. They were feeding us really well, but I didn't like when I left home. I actually forgot my recovery shakes that have like some protein in them, so I felt like I was lacking on some protein. So that night, just happened that there was like a pub right next to camp, and so went over and got a burger. The other thing I focused on that night was I did some yoga, so some stretching and
Mm.
strengthening, just probably like 10 or 15 minutes of just some yoga, like stretches and stuff like that I kind of normally go through. And that's like kind of like on a normal basis for me. I do that a couple times a week. And then I rolled. So the one thing that was really bothering me that day were my knees. And I know that when my knees hurt, it's coming from my quads. And that's because like days 1 and 2, we had so much downhill. Obviously we did 13,000 feet and 11,000 feet. And so my quads got sore. And so they're starting to tighten up and just starting to pull on my knees. So rolled my quads in particular, rolled my TFL, so working on my IT band, and then I did so when I've been working with Bend Racing, they have a sponsor called Mark Pro, and it's basically kind of like a electrical stimulation unit. It's not quite a TENS unit. I don't know what exactly it's called, but it's a Mark Pro. Sends electrical pulses through your muscles. They kind of flushes them. Basically, it's tensing them and relaxing them. I use that every night except for that Wednesday night before day 4. And so I went back to that because I wanted, like, that was the one thing that I really wanted to know was, like, is that making a difference? And right now, I feel like it is, like, because I started it again on day 4 and day 5 and 6, felt amazing. So I did that. I got that on my legs, just in a flush mode. So I did that as well. And so it was kind of those, I guess, 4 things that I kind of focused on each day. So to kind of work or help with recovery. So.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And you have the advantage of coming in. I mean, how long did the average stage take you to run this 40 miles with about 10 to 13,000 feet of vert?
Yeah, they were about 7.5 to 8 hours each. Varied a little bit from I think 7:08 was the shortest day to 8:40 was the longest day. Other than the last day was like 6.5 because that was a little shorter because there was a lot of road that day. But so
Okay,
about
so
eight
some of
hours.
the amateurs, most of the amateurs there are starting at what time of day?
Um,
Like
so yeah,
6,
so they're
7
starting at
a.m.?
6. If you
Okay.
finish your stage under 9 hours the day before, you start. You have to start after 8. And so that's the other thing about
Okay.
this race. The way they do it is that the faster you run the stage the day before, the later you get to start. Um, because
Mm.
this is such a long race, like for me, I'm out there for like 8 hours, right? That's going quick. But for like the normal athlete or the regular athlete that's out there doing this race, like they're running 10 hours to 14 hours, which is like really hard to do that amount of time on your feet every day to then recover after you get in and then restart the next morning by 6 a.m. Like that is almost like a superhuman feat to me. Is like what those athletes are going through is pretty astonishing because they're finishing between like 8 to 10 p.m. Yeah, 10 p.m. is the
Hmm.
cutoff each day. So if you get on after 10 o'clock, the next day you have to drop down to the hatchling. The hatchling is a half course, so you either do the first half or the second half after that. But for those athletes that are getting in between 8 and 10 p.m., like they can move on to the full course and the next day. So they're up at like 4:30 a.m. getting ready for a 6 a.m. start. They're not getting a lot of sleep. They're not like getting a lot of time to eat. It
Hmm.
it just compounds every day and gets harder and harder. And so for those athletes in particular, like it's a really really tough event. So
Yeah. Yeah, especially like when I go for a late night run or if I get home at 10 p.m. or 10:30 p.m. It takes a while for my body temperature to come back down, for everything to kind of settle so that I can fall asleep, right? And I imagine that was the case for a lot of these people. And I think for amateur runners, especially beginner runners, and if you're listening to this and you're a beginner, I used to think that the pros just were somehow just like mentally tougher than everybody else. Like they could just endure more pain, um, and just that excruciating feeling of pushing through, that they could just do that more. And as I've learned more and more about the sport, it's actually the opposite in a lot of cases,
Yeah.
where pros are just so efficient, like their training and their bodies are so efficient that they can actually just run so much faster at least at the same level of suffering, right? And in this case, it's a huge advantage for you. You finish in 7, 8 hours, and you're chilling, and you're going to get a burger, and you're hydrating, and you're doing your rolling and your recovery devices, and everybody else is still out there getting a beat down. So that it brings up an interesting question that I've had, and that's like, pacing strategies. Like maybe here's like a crossover into just not stage racing, but just regular ultra marathons. There's this idea of like, do you start out easy and then try to stay even, at least? Like say you're going to do a 100 miler or even a 50K. I mean, 50K is still a really long race by most standards. So there's these competing philosophies around pacing, where it's like, do you start easy and then try to accelerate into it and try to really pick up your race pace later, or do you just try to move quickly right out of the gate so that you can be done, and so that you can have gained all of that ground while you're fresh? And yeah, you're going to fall off. And I listened to David Roach recently mention that his philosophy has become more and more like, you kind of just got to go for it. I have some good friends who are doing really well on 100 milers, and they kind of believe, go to the top of your zone 2 and just hang on there for a long time. I've heard John Gaston talk about his Leadville 100 mountain biking race, where he just kind of goes to what bikers call the sweet spot, which I interpret as like kind of low zone 3, and just hang on and just stay there as long as you can. What's your philosophy on like how to pace? Because you go too slow and you accumulate all this damage over time, versus you go too fast and you blow up because the power output's just too high.
Yeah, I mean, it is tough, right? It's like, I will say that I have made a ton of mistakes in races as far as pacing goes. And for me, like the most painful way to run a race is to go out too fast and then come back and try to hang on in the last quarter of the race, right? It's going to be, and I do that a lot because that's how I race. But it's so painful. Like you have to be able to then like mentally push through that at the end of the race. If you flip that around and you are go a little bit slower at the beginning and then are able to feel good at the end, that is probably the most enjoyable way to run a race. But I would say the most efficient way to run a race is to run it completely even. And when you're talking about the guys who are like pushing up to like high zone 2, like I'd say that's a pretty sustainable way to run a race. Like you're fully aerobic, and I would say that you can hold that for just about as long as you could hold middle to low zone 2, right? Because I mean, it's just output. Your aerobic output is there. You're in that zone that you're probably the most efficient in. And so like while they say like they're pushing it, I don't believe they're pushing it like above what they can sustain for a very, very long time. And so like with a race like this, like a stage race, yeah, I'm basically like pushing it up to kind of that zone 2 and then holding it there like for the entire time. I don't think it's a like, oh, I'm particularly going out slower or I'm going out too fast and then gonna die off at the end, because like with this, like with the stage race, like what I felt was like I did a really good job over the course of the week of maintaining my pace. And sure, yeah, this is a stage race, so the recovery and the sleep at night makes a huge difference to me, in being able to like sustain that effort level day in and day out. So that day 6, I probably felt the best, other than on day one. Like starting day 6, I felt as good as I did on day 2. And
Wow.
that was just kind of like my body getting into a groove. The soreness was gone. And
Wow.
the joint pain and stuff like that was starting to kind of subside a little bit. I really didn't have as much pain as I did on days 4 and 5 in the like joint pain, ligament pain. And I was really able to roll. My last mile of day 6 was a 7:30 mile, and it was my fastest mile of the day on day 6. My last mile into the castle.
So let me zoom into that question one more layer here. Top of zone 2, and for those listening, top of zone 2, let's just call that the top of your aerobic zone. So that's where you're not breathing too heavily. It's very sustainable for a long period of time. And there's various zone models out there. So sometimes it's confusing because somebody says zone 2, but you got to define what that actually means. But in what we're talking about here is like top of your aerobic zone. What does that feel like to you? Because to me, it feels a little bit uncomfortable. Like I can push my body to the top of my aerobic zone and I'm still aerobic and I could check my lactate, and my lactate would be say less than 2 millimoles per liter or something. And, but I'm still just slightly suffering. Is that congruent with the way you feel? Like, how do you feel when you're at the top of your aerobic zone?
No, I guess we probably need to define that a little bit, right? So, because what I would say is zone 3 is you're still like that's your threshold area, and so you're still actually aerobic in zone 3, but you're pushing really hard. And then once you get into
Mm-hmm.
zone 4, you're anaerobic, right? Is that kind of how you're thinking about this? So
Yeah, let's
to
to make
me,
it simple for people, why don't we say green zone is purely aerobic, like you've got plenty of oxygen, your lactate's not rising. Let's call yellow zone lactate's like elevated but not out of control. And then let's call the red zone like over your lactate threshold where you're just like hanging on for dear life and maybe you've got 4 minutes until you're
and
toast.
so zone like red is then zone 4, yellow is zone 3, and green is zone 1, 2. Is that how you're gonna?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's kind of where I was saying zone 2,
Okay.
but yeah.
So to me, then, like zone 2 is pretty super comfortable. Like it doesn't feel uncomfortable. It feels really efficient. It feels sustainable, and it feels like my breathing is very under control. It feels kind of like the way I think about it is like I feel powerful in zone 2 because I'm very efficient, but I've got a really good sustainable power output where I just feel like I'm just cranking along, and I'm not extending myself to where I'm like, I am going hard, but I can't hold this forever. It's like, no, I'm going at a pace where I can just feel like I could run like this forever. You're not going to be able to,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, for like if you're running like 100 miles or maybe even 50 miles, but like you can run that forever. Like it feels like a very sustainable pace. Because when I get into zone 3, that's where I think about threshold stuff of like I'm now pushing, still aerobic, but I'm not gonna be able to hold this for like more than that's maybe my marathon pace, like 2 hours or something, somewhere in that zone 3. Top of zone 3 is like I can only hold that for an hour because that's my threshold, right? And so
Yeah.
like that's hard. But zone 2, I think about as just being like that. Boom! I can hold this forever, baby. Let's go. And
Even on the uphills, like say during Dragon's Back, you're going along and you're going up those hills, you're staying at that. I could do this forever.
yeah.
Or on the steep uphills, do you ever feel at all like you need a little bit more air than you're
Oh,
getting?
sure. Yeah. I mean, when you get on a steep uphill, like on in this race, I'm starting to hike, so I'm kind of controlling that heart rate a little bit, and I'm bringing it back down. I'm not trying to like push these climbs into zone 3, but they're popping into zone 3, like with my heart rate, just because I'm going uphill. But
Yeah.
then I back it off a little bit and bring it back down because too much into zone 3, like, and I'm not holding that for more than like a couple of hours. And this comes from actually running a lot of 50Ks of like where you're kind of teetering between like 2 and 3 of like, okay, I go out, I'm like at the bottom of zone 3, middle of zone 3. If I hit a hill, it's like, ooh, that's like 150. That's okay. But if I get up to 155, like that's too hard. I'm not going to be able to hold that for the whole 50K. So I'm going to back it down a little bit. Then I want to be back into like 145 ish on this flat stretch. And then I'm really like top of zone 2. Things like that. Things where you're thinking about like, okay, I've got to hold this for like 3 or 4 hours now in this 50K. Like, where do I want to be? Because when you're on that edge, like you're going to notice that precipitous drop at the end of a 50K where you're just bonking and you're just like blowing up because you went a little bit too hard. And it's really easy to do in a 50K because of where zone 3 is. And so,
yeah, and just to clarify for everybody, because I can tell somebody's listening to this right now and saying like, wait, what zone are we talking about here? Like, is it, so let's just say green zone. You're saying you kind of ride mostly, let's just say 90% or more. You're trying to get up at the top of that green zone. And then you're bumping a little bit on something as long as Dragon's Back. There are times when you're bumping into that low yellow zone.
Yeah.
And that's what you were saying is the bottom of zone 3, and certainly staying away from the top of the yellow zone where you could really only hold that for an hour, because you would be creating a lot of strain in your body that would be a lot harder to recover from,
Yep.
whether it's during that exact stage in that day or even maybe going into the next day. That could add up. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about your training leading into this. So one thing I'm really curious about, it makes sense to me if you're going to go do a 6 hour or a 6 day with like 8 hours a day. It makes sense to me that eating a lot after you're done and during is going to be critical, just like keeping your calories up as much as you can. What I'm really curious about is the muscular side of this. Like, and you even mentioned some interesting things like day 6 felt way better than day 4, right? And even your muscle soreness was going away, even though you've loaded your muscles 5 more times going into day 6. So like, what did you do and what do you recommend to people to have? I want to say muscular resilience. I don't want to call it muscular endurance because it's not really what I'm getting at. I'm not getting at like, how do you keep your muscles firing really efficiently for a long time? But it's like, how do you just keep them from having a meltdown?
Yeah.
Right? Like how do you prevent the quads are blown and I'm sitting on a log on the downhill for 20 minutes?
Go really slow on the downhills, little steps. I mean, it's really hard. And so like going into this, the way that I started to think about it was, okay, like I've got to run 40 miles a day for like 6 days in a row, right? Like, what am I going to do for this? Well, I want to get my long runs up and I want to like tack on some doubles to where like I'm doing a back to back to see how that feels. So that was exactly what I did. I crammed a little bit for this, but for whatever reason, like it worked out really well. So I think the takeaway for me is in my training, if you look back, it's like the consistency over the last 4 months is what was the most important, is doing like this, like that kind of stuff, like mountain stuff on a consistent basis and keeping my mileage up. Where I was through June and July, I was probably like 80 miles a week or so. August, I popped that up and I got it. My highest week was 115, but I had like 3 or 4 weeks that were at 100 or above. And that's pretty easy to do when you start popping in like 30-mile long runs too, which I started to do in August. So the idea was that the consistency leading into August was what was going to take me through the race. But I wanted some very specific like stimulus so that I could do the distance and I could do the back-to-back days. So I started popping in like a couple of 30-mile long runs on more mountainous terrain that were taking, anywhere from 6 to 9 hours. And I did a couple of those kind of like, I was trying to do some back-to-backs. It didn't quite work out with family schedule and stuff. So I had like maybe a day in between where I did a 30-miler, another easy run, and then another 30-miler, like the next day. So some kind of back-to-back long runs like that, where I could kind of see what my body was doing um, on those longer runs, and then making sure that I was just eating enough that I was getting through those long runs. And at the end of them, feeling like, oh, okay, I'm not like shattered at the end of this long run. Now I'm going to like work on recovery tonight and see what tomorrow feels like. So making sure that I could just go in to the next day feeling like I could get out there and run basically and not be totally shattered. And it seemed to work. I mean, I was doing some really big runs. We took a family trip up to the North Cascades, which was super mountainous. And so I got in a couple of days of 10,000 feet of gain in 30 miles. They took me anywhere from like 8 or 9 hours for those 2 runs that I did up there over very similar terrain, it turns out. I was kind of shocked at like what like I had been training on versus like when I went over to Wales, like what it actually felt like. And it was really, really similar, which was cool. So if you're going to do Dragon's Back, like go to the North Cascades and train because it's like perfect. But the other thing that people were really having problems with at Dragon's Back that I didn't really think about until I was over there was the terrain and the unevenness of the terrain, just being in that tussocky grass in the bogs and not being able to really see your feet all the time. It was incredibly hard on your lower legs and the stability. You were constantly going side to side, off balance. And so that was really, really hard on those like kind of ancillary muscles that you don't think to work on a normal basis. A lot of people go out for a 30-mile long run and they're on a nice smooth trail, especially here in Bend, and you're not getting that stimulus. Well, it just so happened like the weekend before I left, I was setting course for the expedition adventure race that's happening up in the gorge right now. So I did 2 days of like 6 hours each day, totally off trail, right? Like perfect stimulus for this race. And it was like, I got over to Dragon's Back and started thinking back of like what I'd done. I'm like, oh, like that's why like my lower legs and my legs are handling this so well, is because I've been off trail for a lot of my training recently, where you're just kind of all over the place. You're on uneven terrain. You're not running really fast if you're running at all. But it's all uneven and you're having to work those little ancillary muscles and stuff. And so I got a lot of really good training leading up to this of just being a lot of off trail stuff. And that was one of the big specific takeaways that I noticed with Dragon's Back, that if I were to create a tracer plan, for example, that I would like put in there of like, you know what, there are some very specific things you have to do for Dragon's Back. 1 is long runs. 2 is work on your recovery. 3 is do some of that off trail, like uneven terrain training. Get off the beaten track.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned making a tracer program. I mean, is it possible to make a? Yeah, that's what I was about to ask. Is like what would be the kind of an ability to get a little bit bigger of a pool size for our athletes to warrant actually creating the program. But yeah, we'll have to think about that. But I do think, because I mean, I've talked to Jared Campbell about it as well. Like, there's not going to be a lot of customers for the Jared Campbell Barkley Marathon program, although that would be an awesome program.
Yeah.
But I mean, we got a pool size of 40 per year.
Yeah, exactly.
And
well,
we might need to charge like $10,000 for that or something.
The stage races are a little bigger than Barkley at least, but I mean, there's another stage race this week that's happening, Transalpine, that's over in Europe, 8 days, 7 days, I think. Very similar distances, pretty long. There's Cape Wrath Ultra, that is another stage race that's 8 days long over this very similar terrain because it's in northern Scotland. You've got like, that's what I wanted to like talk about, is like the stage race scene. I love this format. It's so cool because you get in there and it's not like you come in and you spend the night, you race the next morning and you go home. It's like you come in, you race day 1, you get done, and you hang out with everybody for the next 6 days. And you get to know so many more people very intimately.
Yeah.
You're racing with them every day. You're getting to know people really well and meet people. Like I met Dat from Australia who just offered up his his holiday house, like out in the mountains in Australia near Sydney. I was like, oh, cool. I can go to Sydney and hang out in the mountains.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's this camaraderie amongst the
Yep.
athletes that you don't get at other races, that stage racing has a very unique feel to it. And
Yeah, nothing brings people together better than suffering. I mean,
exactly.
it's true,
Yeah.
right? Like going out on an adventure and knowing what you're going through together, it kind of creates a compassion for each other, right? And I think what you're pointing out here is these stage races are such a great environment for making new friends for that reason.
Yeah. And there's some really cool ones around the world too. I mean, there's Trans Rockies, Transalpine, Cape Wrath, Dragon's Back. You've got TDS or MDS. You've got there's like a Beyond the Limits or something. There's another stage race series out there. There's the Coastal Challenge in Costa Rica. I mean, they're all over the place. You just kind of have to
Yeah.
like, actively look for them, because they don't just like pop up a lot of times. They're not like, your big like Western states and stuff that just comes up in the media all the time. It's like you kind of seek them out.
Yeah, well, we'll have to talk about, how do we find the commonalities amongst these races, amongst these stage races, and maybe do a tracer program that would work for Dragon's Back or would work for Trans Rockies or any of the others that are out there, because there are some commonalities, right? They're usually 4 to 6 days. They're usually in the ballpark of, I don't know, in this case is 40 miles a day, maybe 20 miles a day is more.
Yeah, like 20 to 30 miles a
20 to
day is
30
kind
is
of more
probably
common.
more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe kind of try to hit it in the middle. And then maybe there's like a little input question at the beginning that's like, hey, how long what's your average miles per day and how many days is this thing going to go?
Yeah.
And maybe that could adapt with the AI there. So
Yep.
yeah, we'll have to talk more about that. Okay. So a question for you that you kind of triggered in my brain about the back-to-back efforts and the training that you did, and not only your training going in with these back-to-back efforts, but the back-to-back to back-to-back to back effort that you put in during the race. So to kind of give some context to this question, this summer you were in Salt Lake here with us doing the Cirque Series doing the Tracer booth up at the Cirque Series up at Alta. And the day before we did that, I went for a run in the heat. And I got a couple hours in, I was doing fine. And I think I was doing like a 4.5 hour run that day. The last 2 hours, the heat finally just added up. And I came to a screeching halt. My legs were just totally blown out. I was feeling terrible. Started to doubt myself, like just really bad experience. Like just not a strong run. It just blew me up. And the next day, you were in town and you really wanted to go for a run. And I'm like, I'm not passing up my opportunity to go run with Max King, and also scared to death because I got to go run with Max King. So we go and do the Tracer booth at the Cirque Series. And for those of you who are at the Cirque Series, it just got blown out by a huge wind and rainstorm. So there we're scrambling to put the tent all together and get out of there. And we drove down the canyon and we got out on the trail down lower, and it just rained hard on us. And that day we ran, and granted, it wasn't a fast run, especially for you, but it was even an aerobic run for me. But I felt really good. And that was less than 24 hours after I had this total blow up. So my question for you, in kind of setting up that context, is there wisdom sometimes in not listening to your body and not listening to your brain that just said, like, I need a day of recovery, and so I'm just going to stay home and rest? Like, I see that as like a tricky question, because on the one side, you could overdo it and totally get yourself in trouble when you actually are overdoing it. But then there's this other side where you're pointing out, it's like, hey, I was ready to go the next morning after 5 days of 40 miles and 13,000 feet of vert. and there's like kind of a mental block that maybe we have to get over. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, so I think one of the most interesting things about racing and stage racing in particular um, is like that ability to like push through things that we don't think we can. Going into Dragon's Back, I was scared to death. Like that, I've never run that far in a week before. Like, yeah, I've run 40 miles. I know I can do that. Like, okay, cool. But can I do it like for 6 days in a row? I have no idea. But you know what? I'm gonna try, and I'm gonna do the best I can, and I'm just gonna see what happens. And so sometimes when we're put into those situations like that, we can find out a lot about ourselves by just telling ourselves like, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to try it and I'm going to see what happens, because there's really no harm in it. Like, can you get injured from that? Yeah, but it's probably pretty rare. Can you feel like crap for a few days? Like, yeah, for sure. If you push it too far or whatever, but sometimes we're going to learn a lot about ourselves when we do that. And I think that's one of the most important takeaways that I could see in myself, but also other racers at Dragon's Back, is just that idea that when you put yourself into a situation that you just have to do, like you're gonna come up to it. You're gonna rise to that challenge and accept that challenge, and it's either gonna go great or it's gonna go terrible. For me, for this race, it went great, and I found out, hey, yeah, I can run 40 miles a day for 6 days, and shoot, maybe I can even keep going. Like, I felt great after day 6. Like, I woke up on day number 7 and I'm like, man, I'm glad I don't have to run. But could I? Yeah, I actually could. And so that was really cool to learn that about myself. And I think that is probably the most exciting thing that I took away from the Dragon's Back, is just the idea that now I know I can do 40 miles a day. I can do 250 miles in a week, and I'm not fine. That's maybe a bit of a stretch, but I can do it and excel at it and come through it and be stronger for it. And that's cool. And I think that's like what you learned on that run, is that sometimes, like, when you want something bad enough, like that run with me, because I'm so much fun to run with.
Couldn't miss it. No way.
That you like got
I
up
want
for
it
it,
too
right?
bad.
You just said, hey, look,
Yeah.
I'm just going to try it and see what happens. And you found out like it was a cooler day, and you recovered from the day before, and it went fine. And it was a really good experience for you in learning that what your body could do. And I think some people kind of, they get in their own way because they have a run like you did where it's real hot, they feel terrible, and they're like, there's no way I can do a run tomorrow, and so they don't. Where that might have been a great training opportunity for them, and they don't ever accept that challenge. And so when you're forced to do it in a race situation like this, I think it's really valuable. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. A couple things there, and that is that, like, I think a lot of the times our psychology as runners, we think that our last run is our equates to our fitness, like our long-term fitness, right? And so it's like even somebody like me, like, I pay so much attention to my body, to my data. I'm constantly looking at, what my heart rate is, all of those things, because I love it. I love knowing the data behind it. But one danger is that if I have a bad run, like yesterday morning, I had a terrible run. I had done some heat training. I was dehydrated. And it's really easy to say, oh no, I'm not ready for the Bear 100 coming up in 3 weeks because that run was terrible, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen multiple pros, yourself included, and I just saw Tabor Hemming talking about this on one of her videos, where she just kind of was like, yeah, today sucked. Like, I was not moving. But she was kind of like giggling it off, right? Like, she was just laughing about it, which was awesome to see. Like, I think that's a really key takeaway for everyday people like me, and for the everyday people listening to this. Your fitness is much more than just your last run. There's probably a good reason why you are in kind of a dip, right? And that you're going to come out of that dip, and that you can use those dips to kind of pay attention to, like, what happened that day that maybe I can learn from, right? I was dehydrated. I didn't eat well yesterday, whatever it is. Like if you start paying attention, you can really learn a lot. So I think that's awesome. And then the other thing you said that I think is a key takeaway is just getting over this idea of fear of failure. Because what I heard you just say is like, you went out to Dragon's Back, you weren't even sure that you could do it. And if Max King is saying like, I don't know what's going to happen here, everybody listening to this can relate. Like, what's going to happen on that big race, that big scary race that I have coming up that I'm not even sure I'm going to get through alive, right? Or even if you've done it before, there's still trepidation. There's still just that fear of failure. We don't want to make fools of ourselves, right? We don't want to see that we can't do something, and so often we back off. So those are just awesome pieces of advice from Max King himself. Max, what's coming up next for you, man?
What do I got next? Adventure Race National Championships is actually next, 2 weeks away. I was telling people that at Dragon's Back, and they're like, you have what in 2 weeks? And they're like, it takes me months to recover. I'm like, it might take me months to recover too. I don't know how it's going to go, but I got to do it because I'm signed up. So we got that in 2 weeks, back in West Virginia, U.S. Adventure Racing National Championships. It's like a 30-hour race, racing with a couple of Bend Racing teammates there. We're back as the defending national champion, so I'm hoping that it goes well, but we'll see if I'm recovered for that. After that, Euchre Bar, one of my favorite races ever. That's all I'll say about that. Is in October, so we'll see how that goes. So.
Hey, we started this conversation. I introed you and said one of the best things of Max King is he's always doing something different. So you're going from Dragon's Back stage racing to adventure racing, where you're going to be biking, running,
paddling, navigation. I'm our lead navigator. So if we lose, it's probably my fault because I'm navigating.
Because you got us. Yeah. That's awesome.
That's
lost. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Max, thanks so much for doing this conversation. Congrats again on another amazing win. You got to show us your trophy, Max.
You want to see my dragon?
Yeah, we got to see the Dragon's Back trophy. Yep. And for those that are listening to this podcast and not watching it on YouTube, it is a huge bronze dragon.
It's like 20 pounds. I had to pack this thing in my suitcase. It was really heavy. But it's a cool trophy, though. Look at that sucker. Nice little dragon. I named him Conway because that's where we started that journey. And then my daughter, when I put it on the table last night, and she says, that's Georgia. I'm like, okay, that's Georgia. She named it Georgia.
Yeah, from Conway to Georgia,
yeah,
huh?
Yep.
Awesome. Well, congrats so much, Max. For those of you listening who want to train with Max's guidance, he has multiple tracer programs. And the way these programs work is we went to Max. He gives us a bunch of data around how he would train you under various circumstances. How do you feel? What did you do yesterday? All of these different things. And they go into an AI module that is Max King's AI. So it's not mixed with the internet. It's not mixed with Chat GPT. It's not even mixed with other coaches on Tracer. This is Max King's information. And so the AI is really trained to be a proxy for Max as a coach. What that means is you can get Max's opinions and his training guidance in your pocket every single day to ask it what you should be doing for your training going into your goal races on a certain day. And that's Max King's brain that has been harvested. We've harvested Max King's brain and put it into a program. And you can sign up for that and get it for a fraction of the cost of what it would be to try to get Max King to coach you on a one-on-one basis, which would be awesome. We're big fans of that. Don't get me wrong. But the availability of great coaches is low, and the price for it to make it worth their time is very high. And so that's what Tracer's trying to do, is make Max and all of our other awesome coaches. More to come. We have some cool announcements coming in here in the fall. We're trying to bring that influence of world-class pros like Max into your hands, and that's what Tracer's all about. So check it out. Get on Max's programs. We've had people, by the way, we just sent out an email, more people chiming in saying they're setting PRs on the marathon with your marathon program.
Sweet.
And we've just had a lot of good feedback from people who are nailing their goals. So
awesome.
That's really not about Tracer. That's about Max and his methodology and the other coaches who also have awesome success stories. So check it out, tracerfitness.com. You'll see Max there. I'm sure we're going to have him back on the podcast at the next fun win or other notable event in Max's life. So best of luck on the adventure racing, Max. And
thank you.
Anything else you want to sign off with?
Well, we may have a Tracer program coming up for stage racing next year. Who knows? We'll see. So stay tuned.
Yeah, we're gonna have to look at that one. All right, buddy.
Okay, take it easy.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. It was my pleasure. It was a lot of fun.